Hello, everybody. My name is Batya Yaniger, and I want to present to you a topic called Logotherapy, the Applied Psychology of Judaism. So first, to tell you a little bit about myself. I have a PsyD in psychology, and I'm a registered social worker in Israel and a diplomat logotherapist. I started the Viktor Frankl Institute of Logotherapy in Israel in 2011. And I'm a religious Jew from birth, but I went to public school. So I got to know all kinds of people. I've always been very strongly committed to the Torah and passionate about Torah study. And at the same time that I have that passion in me, even though I was very quiet as a child, I stood strongly for things that I believed in very often in my quiet way. And so that idea of the defiant power really spoke to me. And when I saw that Viktor Frankl talks about being pushed by our drives, but pulled by our values, so that really resonated. And I knew that was what I wanted to pursue. I'm going to talk today about what is Torah and what is logotherapy, so that we understand the terms that we're talking about. What is the challenge of a values-based psychology? The principles that logotherapy and Torah share in common, how meaning is manifesting the human dimension, love and responsibility, self-transcendence, the vision of hope, the relationship between divine revelation and conscience, and logotherapy as the applied psychology of Judaism. That's my outline. First of all, when we have a theory of something, usually the application of the theory is the application of something that's in the theory, right? So the theory of Judaism is a religious system and getting close to God. And the application of logotherapy is a therapy, which is helping people find their own way. So what kind of connection can there be between them? So that's what we're going to explore. And I'll just say in a nutshell right now, Judaism is not a theory of psychology. So it would seem that this topic doesn't really make any sense because you can't apply logotherapy as a therapy to something that's not a theory of psychology. But Judaism is about universal values. And logotherapy is the applied psychology of universal values. And I'll develop that idea some more, but that's in a nutshell what I would like to say. So what is Torah and what is logotherapy? Religion demands something from us, and logotherapy helps us find our own way in life. Frankl said, religion provides man with more than psychotherapy ever could, but it also demands more of him. Torah is divine revelation. How could it not demand? And logotherapy reveals conscience, which comes from our own intuitive sense of what is right and wrong. So it seems like Torah is coming from a whole different direction, coming from beyond us, and conscience, which logotherapy emphasizes, comes from within us. So I'm just raising the questions now at the beginning for you to think about, and then we'll explore them. The challenge of a values-based psychology is that psychotherapy, other than logotherapy, doesn't deal with values. It doesn't deal with the spiritual dimension. So it doesn't have any conflict, doesn't have any overlap, put it that way, with religion. But logotherapy overlaps with religion because religion talks about values and logotherapy talks about values. But why does logotherapy talk about values? Because since values give meaning and purpose to life, values must be part of the therapeutic discussion. We can't avoid it. We can't say, well, we pose a risk here of talking about values and maybe we'll impose values on the person. And so we just won't talk about values. We can't say that because it's essential. It's part of being human. So we need to acknowledge all the different parts of the person the biological part, the psychological part, and appeal to the spiritual part. And when we talk about values, we don't impose values, but we point out values. And we find the areas of freedom and responsibility that the person can find within themselves. The principles of logotherapy are very much aligned with Torah. I didn't really define Torah, but it's the 10, think of it as the 10 commandments, the written and the oral law that was given to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai and was developed throughout the ages. So I'm using it in a very broad sense. So in order to even begin our discussion, we have to see what they have in common first, okay? And all of these things on the screen, spiritual dimension, unconditional faith and unconditional meaning, therapy of love and responsibility, self-transcendence, vision of hope. These are all of the points that they have in common. And I'm going to go through each one of them now. First of all, the spiritual dimension. We have a body, we have a psyche, but we are spiritual beings. And in the Torah equivalent to that in the Bible, in Genesis, says that we were created in the image of God. And that's what it means there when we talk about being a spiritual being. Now, the main sign of being a spiritual being is that we are not tied down by our psychology, even though we have influences of inner drives and instincts that push us. We, at the same time, we are free. So that's really the most important principle, I think, of what it means to be a spiritual being. And the Maimonides, the medieval Jewish philosopher and codifier of Jewish law, he said that, this is not an exact quote, but he said that freedom is the independent and autonomous ability to decide for yourself. And since no one can stop you from deciding, you are held accountable for your actions. So accountability, responsibility, and accountability come from our freedom. So if anybody wants to discuss, just as an aside, what is the meaning of freedom? And that there are some people who are interested in freedom and liberty for all mankind, and there are other people on the other side who are interested in responsibility. There's a basic flaw in that argument, because freedom is not on the other side of responsibility. Freedom is the freedom to be responsible. Because if we're not responsible, if we're not free, we can't be responsible, right? We can't be held responsible because we have no control over our actions. So we have to say that we have control over our actions in order to be held responsible. Okay, the second principle is will to meaning. We long for meaning and purpose. That's one aspect of the will to meaning. We don't even know what it is, but we're always looking for it, right? We're looking for something. And at the same time, we're looking to see what is worthy of our longing. What is it that makes the sacrifice and the hard work and effort worthwhile, right? So sometimes we actually find something, we can put our finger on it, and that's the idea of pointing out the values. And then we say, now I want that thing because that thing is meaningful. The third principle, unconditional faith and unconditional meaning. So the meaning of the moment is a requirement that radiates from the world of values, Frankl said. So what is that world of values? It's the universal values that we all recognize intuitively that kind of radiate down from their place in eternity, which Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who was a Hasidic master, of Judaism, he said something very similar. He said, every day is made up of thought, speech, and action, and the Holy One, blessed be He, contracts His divinity from infinity and eternity to a central point of the physical world in which this person stands. So there's that same idea of the eternal value and then the meaning of the moment that's a derivative of the eternal value. And that's what makes us have unconditional faith and unconditional meaning, because the meaning is out there. The meaning is always there. We just have to discover how it applies in the moment. And that's why there's meaning even in suffering. Because if we can't change a situation, We're challenged to change ourselves. We're challenged to do something. And in the Torah, it says, you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. So one of the basic teachings of Judaism is don't be a victim. If you suffered, if you underwent trauma, use it as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to give to other people. And that's where we get the universal unconditional faith and unconditional meaning from. Now, here's a picture of my two of my grandchildren, Halali and Neria, sitting on the trampoline. And what are they doing? They're sharing bamba, this little treat that children like to eat in Israel, puffed peanut butter. And what do? They do this all the time. They share with each other. So you see, she's just kind of sitting there looking in the bag and giving him a piece. And my daughter and son-in-law teaches them to share. That's the most basic education, from the time children are small, to understand that meaning is when you manifest that ability to think about someone else, to care about someone else other than just yourself. So meaning is not just arbitrariness and following the crowd. Freedom is the freedom to be responsible and to listen to and obey our conscience. And the will to meaning is not personal preference, but wanting what is meaningful. And meaning is what is inherently meaningful. So you see, with all three of these principles, it's possible to misunderstand them completely. And that's what I said before about freedom being on one side, responsibility on the other. That's a complete misunderstanding of what freedom means. And the same thing, we can have a misunderstanding of the will to meaning because we think it's just to be able to get whatever we want, right? But it's not that. It always has to be tied to meaning, what is inherently, intrinsically meaningful. And that is to say, what is intrinsically valuable. So logotherapy is an education towards responsibility, Frankl said, and it's also a therapy of love. And we find both in Torah and in logotherapy this intertwining, merging of responsibility with love, right? Because you are responsible towards someone you love, towards somebody, you have a commitment to that person because you love them, and therefore you are responsible to take care of them, to care for their welfare, right? So you cannot separate between love and responsibility. A salvation of man, Frankl said, is in and through love. And love is the great principle of Torah, according to Rabbi Akiva. Logotherapy is, okay, we said that, education toward responsibility, and we're conscious that we're responsible because we have consciousness. An important part of mental health and well-being is know who you are. Rabbi Akiva said, beloved is man who was created in the divine image. And it was with abundant love that human beings were told that they were created in the divine image, because the way you look at yourself is how you will treat yourself. The way you look at other people is how you will treat other people. And Frankl said, if we take people as they are, we make them worse because we're not aiming high enough. We have to see them as they could be, as what they're capable of becoming, and then we help them to become that. Next, the focus on self-transcendence and not self-actualization. I had a student recently named Sergey who said, the more I get away from my self-centeredness and focus on others, the more human I feel. And the more human I feel, the more joyful I feel. I think that just says it so beautifully. So I want to tell you a couple of stories here. First, I had a student who said she was at some person's house and the hostess served chicken and didn't know that she was a vegetarian. And she had this tension, between, who she wants to be as somebody who cares about the hostess. And at the same time, she wants to stand for her convictions. But she felt that in this situation, that's the idea of the meaning of the moment. She felt that in this particular situation, it was more appropriate to eat the chicken, and she did. So there's always this tension between what should I do? What's right for this situation? and what do I want to accomplish in life? And what have I not yet accomplished? I want to suggest that in addition to Frankl's formulation of what I have not yet accomplished and who I am not yet, there's also a tension between doing and letting go. Because what we do in life, we also have a little bit of help from on high without really realizing it. In logotherapy, we call this synchronicity, right? Where, somehow we're open to the possibilities and things fall into place and suddenly we find ourselves in the right situation. In Judaism, it's called divine intervention, right? But it doesn't matter what you call it. It's the idea of being in that space where you realize that you're not the one who's only in control all the time. And you realize that there's help that comes from beyond. But at the same time, you have to do something. And that they don't contradict each other. Your human activity and help from above. An example of this is, it's a very tragic example, but I just felt like the statement that the person made was so exactly describing this idea of the space between doing and letting go. And in June 12th, 2014, there were 3 boys who were kidnapped in Israel, and they were murdered by Arab terrorists, Naftali Frankel, Gilad Sher, and Eyal Yifrach. They were actually picked up when they were trying to get a ride home from school at a bus stop that's about 10 minutes away from my house. And at the end, the army was looking for them, and they were just about to give up, and there was also a civilian party of people that was looking for them, and they were about to give up. And finally, at the end, they said, something just tells me we should look here. Like, he didn't even know why. And he said, you know what, I'm not a very spiritual person. I don't think of myself as a spiritual person. I'm just a regular person. I'm very, do a lot of things for the good of people, But he said there's complexity between the moment when you do not know what to do and the divine providence that comes into it. So there's something mysterious going on, okay? And that's how he felt about it. The former chief rabbi of the UK, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he says that Torah is the voice of hope.
Hello.
Excuse me? Should I continue? Okay. That Torah is the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind, right? Why is that? Because Torah and Judaism always have this attitude of looking forward to the future, of not being bogged down and not to sink into depression over what's happening, but to say there's something that can be different in the future. Why? Because God is always, he's orchestrating events, right? And there's always something else that can happen that we don't know about. And salvation can come in the blink of an eye. There's a saying like that, right? Because the very name of God is, I will be that I will be. This is frequently incorrectly translated, but that's actually the translation. I will be that I will be. I will be whatever I will be in the future, but you don't know yet what that will be, right? Like I'm continuing to surprise you, right? And we have that same divine quality about us, that no one knows what the next person will do in the next moment. We don't even know what we ourselves will do in the next moment. Because we are unpredictable. Okay, we're not determined, and therefore we're unpredictable, and we never know what we can do next. So Frankel said that there are 2 races of mankind: the race of the decent and the race of the indecent. That it's always a choice between one of those, and each and every moment we can choose which one is it going to be. So when we go back to the overview again, and we see the relationship between divine revelation and conscience, and logotherapy is the applied psychology of Judaism, I want to come back to that now. The concept of a demand. When Frankel said that religion demands more from us, right? Even though it maybe gives us more, but it demands more, right? But think about it for a minute. conscience also demands of you. It's not just religion that demands. When people say, I just had to do this, I couldn't live with myself if I wouldn't do it. There's a story about Rabbi Lansong, who was captured in Zimbabwe as a child. And one of the women in the village said she was saving her life. And she said, I won't throw her away. She is a living human being. Just that simple statement from a simple villager says it all, right? That a human being is something that we have to regard as precious. So that idea of the demand, like the conscience demands just as much and maybe even more so than the Torah demands or God demands something of us. It's the conscience that's demanding something of us. So in Torah, we have the demand of a covenant. What's a covenant? It's an agreement. It's a relationship. So the demand comes from the context of a relationship, which is freely assumed obligations and commitments. You love someone, you get married, and you freely accept a commitment to this person. And that's the way it is with our relationship with God. Now, there's a commandment in the Torah that says, do the righteous and the good. Okay, and Nachmanides was a leading Jewish commentator in the Middle Ages. He asked the question, what kind of commandment is this? Like, we have 613 commandments. We need another commandment? No, but do the righteous and the good is a commandment telling you, use your conscience, right? That's what that commandment is telling you. You cannot be a religious person if you're not a person first, if you're not a human being first. And you cannot be a human being if you don't have freedom of choice, because then you're just a robot. And you can't have freedom of choice if you don't obey your conscience, because then what are you? Then you're just listening to everybody else. You're just giving up your freedom. And then you're not human anymore. As Frankl says, if you don't follow your conscience, you're not human. So now we start to see that there's like closer relationship here than we thought there was, right? Between what the Torah expects or asks and what, logotherapy is saying, what it means to be human. So logotherapy is the applied psychology of Judaism, as I'm calling it, because Torah is the all-inclusive source of universal values, okay? The Torah was not meant to be only for the Jewish people. It's meant to be for the whole world. Not that the whole world has to keep all of the laws and precepts of the Torah, but that the universal values of belief in one God and belief, and because of that belief in one God, we see every single person in the world as being a child of the Creator in the image of God, and therefore someone we should respect and love and cherish. We should value each and every person. So that is what makes logotherapy the applied psychology, because it's applying those values, how to do them in the moment. So I'm going to tell you a story about how you apply those values in the moment. When my children were much younger, they were outside and they were having a snowball fight in the snow. And I was sitting in the house and working on the computer, and the door was locked, and I didn't feel like going down to answer the door when they rang the doorbell. I didn't know that it was an emergency. And I was just tired of answering the door. But what happened? My son, Meir, who was 12 at the time, he threw a snowball and he slipped on the ice, and he fell and broke and knocked out his 2 front teeth. So my son, Rafi, was there, and he's trying to get me to come, but I didn't answer the door. It was before cell phones, before everybody had a cell phone, and he didn't know how to get my attention. So what did he do? He shut down the main switch on the electric box. So my computer went off, my lights went off. That got my attention. So that's what it means to be in the moment, listening to hear that call of the meaning, and realizing that you are part of the picture. You are never just a bystander that's not connected, right? To be connected to the meaning is to realize that you're connected to the whole of life and of what's going on around you, right? You're not an isolated, separate, part. If you're only inside your ego, you'll feel isolated and separate, right? But the truth is that we're part of that larger whole. And anytime we recognize that, hey, I'm part of what's going on here, I can do something here. So I need to respond, right? So that's what it means to apply those values in the moment. So conscience is a prerequisite for Torah and a generation and a genuine relationship with God. So in summary, to summarize, conscience is the foundation and prerequisite for everything, okay? Even though the Torah is all-encompassing and includes all the values, so if you say it that way, you say, okay, logotherapy is only a part of Torah, right? But at the same time, it's the foundation, right? So it's something you cannot do without. So logotherapy needs the universal values that Torah talks about, and Torah needs conscience, because what does conscience tell you? Something that's not written in any book. I had a student who talked about how there was a group of children he was watching and giving extracurricular activities to, and the mother came and she had this fleeting look on her face like she was kind of upset. But he just said hello and goodbye, and then afterwards he said to himself, you know what, I think she maybe needed something from me. That's what it is. So to know yourself and to be in tune with the feelings that are coming up for you, to know what's going on in the world around you, to recognize the meaning as it's coming to you, and to recognize your relationship to it. And that's something that can't be written in any book. I don't care how many details of all of the intricate laws there are, and people spend years and years poring over it. But if they can't recognize the meaning of the situation they're in, then it's all worthless. Okay, so choice is God's act of love to man. To give man free choice was God's act of love, and man's demonstration of love for God is also where he exercises choice. Through the exercise of choice, you demonstrate your love for God and for other people and for yourself. So logotherapy, as an applied psychology of Judaism, does not make it a Jewish psychotherapy. It makes it a universal psychotherapy, because we're talking about universal values here. So Torah is serving through meaning, serving God through meaning. Logotherapy is healing through meaning. So if we take these two sentences and put them together, we see that meaning is the thread that ties them together. But it's not the only thing that's being tied together. It's that serving and healing are tied together. The religion and psychology, art and science, intellect and emotions, different cultures, to realize that through this comparison that we're making, we're actually bringing together everything that sometimes we don't recognize are connected and really are connected. I just want to give a thank you to Dr. Kanda, because in the book that I'm writing right now, let me stop to share. I was sharing my chapters of the book with him, and he said, Torah is all inclusive, all encompassing, and logotherapy is part of that. And I didn't have the nerve to say that myself. Then when he said it, I thought, okay, I'm changing the rest of my book. And and then I saw a lecture by Frankel that said the same thing, basically, because he said that there's values which are all encompassing. That includes everything that's theoretical, that's ultimate meaning, and then the meaning of the moment is how we apply it, in the moment. And we can't underestimate that meaning of how we apply it. Like I said, we can't do without it. And thank you to Pan for making all the images of my PowerPoint. And thank you to everyone for this opportunity to present these ideas to you. Thank you to Taria for pushing me to do it, because I thought I wouldn't be ready for a long time. And now I'm very happy to take questions and discuss it some more.
Well, I'm sure we're all very moved and thrilled and delighted by what we heard, Batya, because it really makes everything so much more real. It makes our faith, in whichever way we express it, so much more real. And it shows that, we can't really separate the dimensions that Frankl said is from the lowest level to the highest transcendent level, but it's actually the transcendence that holds everything meaningfully together. And you brought up that point so beautifully by saying we're all interconnected. Like I said last time, each one has a tone, even different perspectives are different tones that if they brought meaningfully together, truth becomes very, very real. It isn't abstract. It's something we can grasp. It's something that we can see how it works in real life. It's something that we ourselves can attest to. So thank you very, very much for absolutely wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Taria. Yeah, Ronnie.
Thank you, Batya. I enjoyed it very much. I'd like to ask you, if you would, to take us through a little bit of transition from Judaism to universalism to the opportunity for an atheist or agnostic to connect to the applied psychology of Judaism. So if I understand correctly, that the connection between logotherapy and Torah, and then it goes off. How do you take that to someone who is not Jewish or is not a believer in God, and how does that come together?
Right. Okay. So, as I said, with that example of the villager who said, she is a living human being, I won't throw her away. Okay. So where does that come from? Right. So, someone who is an atheist or comes from whatever culture in the world can find that value of human life in their own culture or just in their own heart, right? You don't, as Frankl says, these are all intuitive. The values of logotherapy are intuitive. So, but he says that it's like the navel, that you, by seeing the navel, you recognize that you're connected to something else beyond yourself, right? So sometimes you only look at and see, like, what do I sense intuitively? And sometimes you can say, and I have an idea of where that came from too. It's like when you think about your who you are as a person, and I got this and this from my parents or my grandparents. I got this characteristic, so. Sometimes you might not notice that, and sometimes you say, yeah, I could see where that came from, and and so it doesn't matter whether you know or not where it came from. That's why Frankl calls it the unconscious God. But the unconscious God is really that unconscious awareness of those higher values.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, the proof is in the pudding. I think the most wonderful illustration of truth is that it is experienced, that values, that things that are truly valuable and meaningful and, are connected to those universal values. When you practice them, they work. They have results, they have impact, and and you feel it yourself in terms of it uplifts you, it makes you feel alive, you're involved, and there's purpose in your life, even though you haven't put it in any religious framework whatsoever. And I like what Batya also mentioned as the opposite, that you can, oh boy, you get these Bible punches, and you get these, you can take religion to dogmatic extremes, and you make it totally meaningless.
Right.
And in fact, it then has the opposite effect. Then it's oppressive, then it silences people's voices, then an ugly sense of dominance and violence and hatred emerges, the very opposite of universal values. And that is why actually I delight in having students that are atheists. The first one I had was listening to some of the videos I made. He contacted me. He said, I'm not sure about doing logotherapy because you're talking about God and I don't believe in God. I said, wow, are you welcome? I would love to have you on my courses. Do come. Your view of things would be fresh and new and invigorating. I'd love to hear them. Let's explore them together. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened. And the spiritual growth of this person and what he taught me and enriched my life about was simply wonderful.
Yeah, Taria, I want to relate to some of the questions that I didn't see in the chat.
Okay, sorry.
So this makes perfect sense since God created the world, and all you said about the Torah holds true no matter what religion or belief system, right? Okay. Does this suggest that the universe or cosmos is moral? Yeah, I mean, what does moral mean, really? It means that that everything is for the good, is like has this energy about it that's moving towards healing, towards goodness. So so you could say that the cosmos, whatever you want to call it, if it's not just haphazard and random, rather it's organized and it has some kind of intentionality in the creation itself, then it's you could call that moral, I think. Yeah, okay, that's all I see right now, but anybody else wants to say anything?
Sorry, if I may just open a topic of conversation.
Sure.
There was mentioned someone without morality is not a human. I've not read that of Victor yet.
Yeah. Wait, let me just clarify what Frankel says. Frankel says that we are obligated to obey our conscience, because if you don't, I don't know the exact quote, but if you don't obey your conscience, you're not being human. I mean, you're not using your humanity. I'll put it that way. You're not. It's like you're a plane that's still on the ground and that's not flying. Like you're not using your human capacity if you don't use your conscience.
Okay, so it's not like a Plato component that I think, therefore I am. So like, well, he wasn't making a statement, but it's an interesting thing because the last week on South African radio, they've been talking about the morality of the youth and how it's decaying towards a point where we are having from litter bugs all over the place, where we have no more pride within our surroundings towards sexuality, and where, pardon the crassness of this next statement, but where rape is seen as an everyday thing, and how that's kind of becoming a decaying factor in South African culture, especially in the youth, and it's a very hard thing to kind of comprehend towards the idea that we say that morality is almost like a core principle within us, where it's hard for me because I believe that the true nature of man is evil, and that we need to work towards becoming moral. Sorry, I'm struggling with the concept.
When you talk about nature, human beings are actually very complex. So like a lot of questions, you're both right. Like, it's true that man's nature is bad, and it's true that man's nature is intrinsically good, because we have something to overcome. There's something in us that we're like, it's like we're given a handicap to overcome, and then through overcoming it, we become stronger, right? So our ethical sense is also being challenged. We're challenged to overcome our fears. We're challenged to overcome our, greed, just the desire to control everybody else. And so we're challenged to overcome that and reach for something that's inside of us, that's deeper, more deeply buried inside of us, right? So I would contend that you're right, that we have that in our nature to do evil things, right? But the question is, what is stronger? What is stronger? And I think that Frankl believes, and I believe that the good actually can overpower, is stronger actually, and it can overpower the bad because it's deeper within us. But we have to be able to open ourselves up to it.
But it needs to be a conscious, direction towards it. In other words, if I choose evil or good, moral or amoral, I will most probably go to moral, versus a stagnant perspective where I feel we are as a culture in South Africa is more stagnant because of the situation.
Right. So think about what Frankl said, that the way you look at yourself is the way you'll treat yourself and the way you'll behave. Right. So the more we look at ourselves as, incapable, helpless, victims and so forth. So we're going to treat ourselves in that way. And then that will feed the evil, right? But if we look at ourselves as no, we have something more powerful within us, that stronger, the stronger good that's within us, then we will, overpower the evil with that.
But if I can just interject and ask this particular question, what is the greater evil? That you have evil in yourself, and then but also good, and you've got to let the good triumph over the evil side in your nature, and if you don't, that's very bad. Or is it worse if you have every ability and you have what Frankl called the unscathed, pure human spirit created in the image of God? In other words, an inherent meaning and intuitive knowing of who you fundamentally have been created to be, and you're not that. Isn't that a greater evil? Mm-hmm. And it's more like, this is what Frankl said, if we're not using our human capacities, our freedom to responsibility, what happens is that we fall into the subhuman aspects of the lower parts of our nature. In other words, lower parts only in the sense of not being instructed, not being trained, not being shaped, where the whole process of reaching out to good is being stopped. And we can really ask, well, why? What's wrong with South African culture? Who's to blame for the youth's terrible behavior? Where is the parenthood? Where's the leadership? Where's the training? Where is the evoking through education of who they really are and are capable of being? So, instead of judging the youth, I will judge the system, that it is a failed system, because we need leadership. We need the Torah. We need teaching and instruction, but to inspire and awaken what we do have in absolute magnificence and beauty. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Batya.
Yeah, hi, Vita.
Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry. I apologize. It took me a long time to get home. But I did listen the whole time. It was brilliant. Thank you so much. It was really brilliant in the chat. So I just want to add something about what was just said now. First of all, when you said is man's nature good by nature or bad by nature? I think we have to remember dimensional ontology here, because on the ego side, on the ego level, you can say we have all these drives, etc., because we are egotistic. So you can also say we are bad in a sense, not evil, but we are not that good like when we are in self-transcendence. But on the level of the authentic self, that's altogether a different game there. And there we are like the sun, which is shining, and we don't have any self-interest. We just shine, and that's why we have what you said before. We have satisfaction and happiness and all that when you are being spiritual. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And the other thing that was asked now about morality, I want to remind ourselves what Frankl talks about at the end of the unconscious God, or man's search for ultimate meaning. He talks about, Teria sometimes mentions it, about the pre-reflective self-understanding of man, but there he also talks about pre-moral understanding. So I think that's very important to know that before society, let us say, have moral laws that we have to live by, we have engraved in ourselves the ethics, which is different from morality. That's why he called it pre-moral knowing or something like that. So this is exactly that image of God that you were talking about, because we are all divine being, spiritual being, and this is our essence. That is who we are. And that is also why when you talked about presence, I think that really answers how can we obey conscience, and why does conscience have this demanding quality about it? Why should we obey it if it didn't have that demanding quality that calls us to do something when we feel it is right? Because we feel it so deeply and innerly, because this is something that is engraved in us as the divine source of being, which is God.
Right. Thank you, Dita. Yeah, Ronnie.
I'll put this a second in the chat. I just want to say something. Oh, we can go in there. Okay. So didn't do that. I think something I would suggest, I didn't see your presentation. I was called away for a second, so I maybe missed it, but something very, very relevant to the Torah as in vis-a-vis logotherapy. And I think it's the edict in Deuteronomy, which says, God says, I put before you life and death, and you shall choose life.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And continuation, which I don't have here. Now, this idea that I shall put before you a choice between life and death, and you shall choose life, is very much at the core of what Judaism is saying about choice. What you said about hope.
Yeah.
So I would suggest adding that to your presentation. I think that would be very much in line with it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you added that. That there really is a good addition. Yeah, very important. Because the choice, the choice is there. It's for you to choose it.
And that very
so much so
formulation.
Logotherapy. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And that very formulation tells us everything. I put before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life that you may live. In other words, choose who you are, that I've created you to be. Don't go off the track and deface yourself as a human being in my image. In other words, saying, therefore choose life. It means, therefore, because you have this kind of capability in you to choose and to know the good and to know what is wrong, do what you are capable of doing. There's never an excuse, actually, for saying, oh, well, I couldn't do it because, you know what, I've got these inclinations. What can I do about it? You know, I'm bad, so. Right. Oh, thank you. Well,
Someone else have any comments? Yep, Batya.
You got to unmute.
You got to unmute yourself. You're still muted.
There
There
you
you
go.
go.
Okay. I think it was brilliant. I imagine that all the Christian denominations, which stem from the Old Testament, would go along with much of what you said, and it would be very interesting if there's anybody in the group who's does not belong to a Judeo-Christian religion, to see what's there, the similarities or differences, and you know, to see if the universal values that you spoke about are universal to other religions as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because, you know, you could point to people who clearly have rejected universal values and say, like, well, what happened here? You know, but you know, who's to say what's a universal value? Like, that would be another discussion, maybe. I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know if anyone here wants to take that up, but to be continued. So, does anyone else have any points?
You got John. John raised his hand.
John, okay.
Hi, just a quick comment. I think it comes down to choice, you know, being part of an alternative faith practice. And I think it's just really ultimately down to the individual. The same kind of commonalities, people, you know, say one thing, do another, and so forth, living according to how you believe. And it ultimately just comes down to the individual making choices.
Mhm.
I have found that those values are pretty similar in other faith systems, and that human beings are more similar than different.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Barbara. Haven't seen you in a while.
Can I share something?
Yeah, sure.
I was reading, so I've been reading The Meaning in Suffering by Elizabeth Lucas, and there's a page in the book where she talks about when Franco was doing his tour, both in Europe, in Europe, America, and then going into the East. And when he was doing his tour in the Western part of the world, they received his ideas as new, whereas when he went to the East, they saw it as ideas that already exist, just that he's now he's now made it his own, if that makes sense. So I just thought to add that in.
Yeah, interesting point. When does it resonate with people? And I think that you can present logotherapy in any language that it will resonate with those people, as long as you touch them inside, in that place that understands that.
I think, like someone has mentioned before, that we are more alike than different, and cultures are more alike than different. I really think truth is one, and it can't be otherwise. Ultimate meaning is just one. And that's also the meaning of by the way, logos has to do also with morality. In ancient Greece, it's the law of order in the universe and the law of the good. So I think truth is one, and I think it's an art. Sometimes when you meet a person from another culture, it's an art to, so to speak, to translate the terms into the terms of the other culture.
Mhm.
Whereas if you begin to rather than search for the understanding and let the truth reveal itself by itself, rather than that, you begin to discuss and see who is right. You just go into terminologies, which is a pity, because it doesn't matter how you call things. The intention, if you, as you said just now, Batya, if you understand it with your heart, it's the same. It's really the same. And people
Right.
all over the world have come to this higher consciousness through listening to their hearts, through listening to their conscience, and mainly through being present.
Right, Vida, what you said at the end about being present, that's what I was kind of waiting for, because too often I think we put the emphasis on the values. I mean, those are where we have to start, but we need to remember that the importance of logotherapy is in uniqueness, the uniqueness of the person and of the situation that we're in, that requires you. That's what demands of you to recognize it on your own, what the meaning of this situation is, right? And so that's why you need to be present, and you need to understand, who am I? What does the situation demand from me? Right? Yeah, Lauren.
Actually, I think what the message that I received from your presentation is that love transcends any religion,
Yeah,
any value, any culture, and that's what it boils down to, is the therapy of love. And that came
that's
across
right.
very
But
clearly
in order
to me.
to know how to love, you can't know how to love as an abstract thing. You have to know, what is my area of freedom here? And
Yes.
who is this other person, and what are they able to hear? Soon
So
I'm
it's
going to
fun.
go and visit. Soon I'm going to go and visit my mother in Chicago. She's 101, and
Yeah. Wow.
there's a lot of things I can't say to her because she can't hear it. She can hear with her hearing aids, but she
But
can't
not,
hear me.
yeah. Okay.
You have to know what people are capable of hearing and how you can, communicate with them. What's the best way to communicate with them? There's so much more beyond the value, as important as the love is, but we can't just talk about love and that's the end of it. That's only the beginning of it.
No, agreed. But I think going in with love is the best way to start.
Yeah, right.
Thanks.
I agree, Lauren. Yeah. Okay, Maxine.
Thank you, Batya. I really enjoyed your topic, and when you touched just now on sort of the uniqueness of the human being. When I was, it was because of Judaism and Torah that connected me with logotherapy, and the desire of wanting a therapy that sat with my faith, but dealt with the humanness and the uniqueness of the individual, without it being bound up in an institutional religious kind of setting. And I think when you said about Torah being serving through meaning and logotherapy healing through meaning, I think that really tied that up for me, that's what I was looking for, something where I can marry the two and see the individual and the uniqueness of the individual, hold on to my faith still without that having to be set aside. And just seeing the individual. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed that.
Okay, thank you so much, Maxine. I think it's a good place to end because it's 8:00 now. So thank you so much.